My husband broke my heart on Valentine's Day, not by forgetting flowers, not by coming home late, but by getting down on one knee and proposing to his billionaire CEO while I was standing just a few feet away. He thought I was just the struggling wife who had nothing left to offer. He had no idea I was quietly preparing the one truth that would destroy everything he had built with her. So please stick with me, because this story only gets crazier from here. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. My name is Bryn Hale, and for 7 years I believed my marriage to Gavin Cross could survive anything. I worked long hours, stretched every dollar, and supported every dream he chased because I thought that's what real partners did. When Gavin landed a high-paying job working for billionaire CEO Celine Voss, I celebrated his success. But little by little, he changed. The man who once thanked me for believing in him started criticizing my clothes, my apartment, and even the life we had built together. I convinced myself the pressure of his new job was making him act differently. Then Valentine's Day arrived. Gavin invited me to what he called a company appreciation gala. Instead of celebrating our marriage, he stood before a room full of executives and investors, praised Celine for transforming his life, dropped to one knee, and asked her to marry him. As applause filled the ballroom, he called our marriage a mistake. Security escorted me outside while everyone pretended I didn't exist. I left without making a scene, carrying a secret neither of them knew, one that would soon change everything. The next few days were painfully quiet. I stayed alone in the small apartment Gavin and I had once called home, surrounded by reminders of a life that had disappeared overnight. Every room held a memory, but none of them could explain how the man I loved had planned to humiliate me so publicly. 3 days after the gala, a courier knocked on my door with divorce papers. The dates on the documents made one thing painfully clear: they had been prepared weeks before Valentine's Day. Gavin hadn't acted on impulse. He had been planning to erase me from his life long before I ever stepped into that ballroom. People I thought were friends stopped answering my calls. They accepted Gavin's version of the story without asking for mine. Even some of my relatives told me to sign the papers, walk away, and forget everything. They kept repeating the same sentence: "You can't fight billionaires." As I packed Gavin's remaining belongings into boxes, I found a folder buried beneath old files. Inside were financial reports, internal memos, and contract summaries connected to Celine Voss's company. At first they looked ordinary, but then I remembered the conversations Gavin used to have on speakerphone while working from home. He never realized I understood business agreements because years earlier, I had helped my late grandfather review investment contracts. Instead of crying, I sat at the dining table and carefully sorted every document by date, every signature, and every unusual transaction. My heartbreak slowly gave way to clarity. For the first time since Gavin betrayed me, I stopped thinking about revenge driven by anger. I knew patience and the truth would accomplish far more than rage ever could. As I organized the documents, memories of my grandfather came rushing back. Long before I met Gavin, he had built one of the most respected private investment firms in the country. He believed real influence didn't need attention, which was why almost no one knew his name outside the business world. Before he passed away, he placed the company inside a confidential family trust and named me the majority owner. His final piece of advice was something I never forgot. He told me never to reveal my position until I was certain the people around me valued me for who I was rather than for my wealth. I took those words seriously. Instead of living like an heiress, I chose a quiet, ordinary life. I wanted honest friendships and a marriage built on love, not money. Gavin never questioned why I avoided expensive things or why I preferred simplicity. He believed I had nothing beyond my modest paycheck, and I let him keep believing it because I thought our relationship was genuine. After my grandfather's death, I stepped away from daily operations and trusted experienced executives to manage the investment firm while I remained an anonymous owner. I still reviewed important reports whenever major financial decisions required approval. As I opened the latest investment files, one familiar name immediately caught my attention. Celine Voss's corporation had received enormous financing from my family's trust over several years. I read every page twice to make sure I wasn't mistaken. Suddenly, everything looked different. I wasn't the helpless woman Gavin believed he had abandoned. Without anyone realizing it, I held the authority to approve or deny the funding that kept Celine's ambitious empire growing. One decision from me could change everything. The next morning, I called Nolan Pierce, the attorney who had worked beside my grandfather for more than 20 years. He had helped establish the family trust and knew every detail of its investments. After listening carefully to everything that had happened, he didn't offer sympathy first. Instead, he suggested we review every agreement connected to Celine Voss's company before making any future decisions. Later that afternoon, we met at the firm's private office. Nolan opened several confidential files and calmly explained something I never expected to hear. Although Celine's company appeared incredibly successful to the public, much of its rapid growth depended on refinancing provided through my family's investment group. The business looked strong from the outside, but several expansion projects relied on continued financial support. If future funding was delayed or suspended, those projects could begin falling apart within weeks. Nolan reminded me that I had every legal right to review ongoing agreements before approving another dollar. He made one thing very clear: we would do everything by the book. I wasn't interested in breaking laws or using my position for personal revenge. I wanted facts, accountability, and honest business practices. If Celine's company was truly healthy, the records would prove it. If not, the truth would eventually come to light. Independent investigators began examining contracts, financial statements, and internal reports. As the review continued, troubling patterns slowly emerged. They found inflated earnings projections, hidden financial obligations, and presentations that painted a far stronger picture than the actual numbers supported. Nothing had been made public yet, and no accusations were announced. But behind closed doors, a formal investigation was now underway, and there would be no turning back. While the investigation continued quietly, Gavin seemed to be living the life he had always wanted. Every week he appeared at exclusive dinners, elegant charity events, and luxurious business retreats alongside Celine Voss. Expensive hotels, private flights, and designer suits replaced the modest life we had once shared. From the outside, he looked happier than ever. He believed leaving our marriage had opened the door to a future filled with power, wealth, and endless opportunity. But the reality behind closed doors was very different. Celine never treated Gavin as an equal. Whenever they attended meetings, she interrupted him, dismissed his opinions, and reminded everyone that every success belonged to her company, not to him. In private, she criticized his judgment and made it clear that his career depended entirely on her approval. Each time Gavin brought up their wedding plans, Celine found another excuse to postpone them, claiming the business needed her full attention until several important projects were completed. Gavin ignored every warning sign because he was too captivated by the luxurious lifestyle surrounding him. He convinced himself that once the company reached its next milestone, everything would fall into place. Instead, unexpected financial restrictions brought several expansion projects to a sudden stop. Banks became cautious, scheduled investments were delayed, and suppliers started asking questions about future payments. Investors who had once praised Celine now demanded detailed explanations during board meetings. Gavin assumed jealous competitors were trying to sabotage the company. He spent his days searching for someone to blame, never once considering that the chain of events had begun with the woman he had humiliated and discarded on Valentine's Day. Over the following weeks, I attended a series of confidential board meetings using my legal identity, the one connected to my grandfather's investment trust. Neither Gavin nor Celine had ever seen me in that role, and because my ownership had always remained private, they had no reason to suspect I was involved. Around the table, experienced executives greeted me with professionalism and respect. They weren't interested in my personal life. They expected thoughtful decisions, and that was exactly what I intended to provide. Every report was reviewed carefully. Every financial projection was questioned. I made it clear that my personal history with Gavin would have no influence on the outcome. The trust had been built on responsible investing, and every company, regardless of its reputation, had to meet the same standards. After weeks of independent analysis, the final recommendation was unanimous. Celine Voss's corporation no longer satisfied the trust's risk requirements. Until the company corrected the financial concerns uncovered during the review, additional funding would be suspended. The decision followed established policies and was supported by documented evidence. The effects appeared almost immediately. Banks became more cautious before approving new loans. Several vendors shortened payment deadlines, unwilling to extend generous credit terms. Planned expansion projects slowed to a standstill as uncertainty spread through the business. I never announced the decision publicly or took satisfaction in watching the company struggle. There were no speeches, celebrations, or dramatic confrontations. I simply continued my work, knowing every consequence came from choices Celine herself had made. The truth wasn't destroying her business. It was exposing weaknesses that had been hidden for far too long, and honesty was finally replacing arrogance. As the financial pressure continued to build, Celine refused to believe the problems were simply the result of poor business decisions. She became convinced that someone was deliberately blocking her company's future. Determined to find the source, she hired respected consultants, private analysts, and legal experts to uncover the identity of the mysterious investor behind the family trust that controlled so much of the company's financing. Week after week, they searched through public records, corporate filings, and ownership structures. Every trail ended the same way. The trust had been carefully designed years earlier to protect the privacy of its owner, and every confidentiality agreement remained legally enforceable. No one outside a very small circle knew my connection to it. Desperate to regain Celine's approval, Gavin threw himself into the search. He stayed late at the office, attended strategy meetings, and volunteered to coordinate with outside investigators. He believed that if he could uncover the anonymous investor, he would prove his value and restore Celine's confidence in him. The irony would have been almost unbelievable if it hadn't been my life. For weeks, Gavin worked tirelessly to identify the person responsible for the funding decisions, never once realizing he had shared breakfast, holidays, and 7 years of marriage with her. The woman he dismissed as ordinary had been hiding in plain sight all along. Every unsuccessful report made Celine more impatient. She began questioning the people around her and doubting their competence. Gavin felt the pressure growing with every passing day. As company losses continued to mount, both of them became increasingly desperate, unaware that the answers they were chasing had been sitting across their own dinner table for years. A few days later, Nolan called with news that would change everything. Celine Voss had organized an exclusive investor conference to reassure lenders and financial partners that her company remained stable. The event would include major stakeholders, board members, and representatives from every investment group connected to the business. Since my family's trust held a significant financial position, I had received an official invitation as the majority owner. Nolan looked at me and said it was time to stop hiding. He reminded me that I had spent years protecting my privacy, but this meeting required complete transparency. I wasn't attending to embarrass Gavin or Celine. I was attending because responsible ownership meant showing up when important decisions affected thousands of employees and investors. I agreed. On the morning of the conference, I chose a simple navy business suit and walked into the hotel without seeking attention. I checked in, greeted a few familiar executives who recognized me from previous board meetings, and quietly took my place near the front of the conference hall. Before the meeting officially began, Gavin spotted me from across the room. His expression quickly changed from surprise to amusement. He walked over with a smug smile, convinced I had somehow slipped into an event reserved for elite investors. Loud enough for nearby executives to hear, he mocked me, asking whether I had wandered into the wrong ballroom and joking that security must have forgotten to check invitations. I remained calm and didn't answer. Several executives exchanged confused glances but said nothing. Gavin walked away feeling victorious, completely unaware that within minutes the entire room would discover the truth, and that his careless laughter would become the most humiliating mistake of his life. A few moments after Gavin returned to his seat, the conference officially began. The chairman welcomed everyone and thanked the investors for attending during such an important period for the company. After a brief introduction, he paused, smiled in my direction, and invited me to join him at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I'd like to recognize Bryn Hale, the principal owner of the Hale Family Investment Trust, one of the nation's most respected private investment groups and a key financial partner to several major corporations." The room fell completely silent. Gavin's confident expression disappeared instantly. His face turned pale as he stared at me, unable to understand what he had just heard. Across the room, Celine looked equally shocked. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. One by one, executives rose from their seats to shake my hand and welcome me with the respect they had shown throughout our confidential board meetings. The same people Gavin had tried to impress now addressed me as the trust's majority owner. Once everyone settled down, the presentation changed direction. Instead of discussing Celine's future expansion plans, the chairman reviewed the findings from the recent financial assessment. Every concern was supported by audited reports, signed agreements, and verified accounting records. There were no dramatic accusations, personal insults, or emotional speeches. The discussion focused entirely on documented facts and responsible governance. As the evidence appeared on the screen, Gavin finally understood the truth. The woman he had dismissed as ordinary, embarrassed in public, and abandoned for someone wealthier had quietly been one of the most influential investors in the room all along. In a single moment, everything he believed about power, success, and my worth completely fell apart. The investor conference changed everything. Within days, news that major financing had been suspended spread throughout the business community. Companies that had once rushed to partner with Celine's corporation became cautious. Banks delayed loan approvals while they reviewed the company's financial position more carefully. Existing lenders requested updated reports before extending additional credit, and several planned expansion projects were quietly placed on hold. Inside the company, the atmosphere grew tense. Board members called emergency meetings and demanded clear explanations for the financial concerns that had surfaced during the independent review. Some senior executives, worried about protecting their own professional reputations, submitted their resignations rather than remain associated with the growing uncertainty. Confidence that had taken years to build began disappearing in a matter of weeks. The pressure also destroyed the relationship Gavin and Celine had proudly displayed on Valentine's Day. Instead of standing together, they turned against each other. Celine accused Gavin of becoming a distraction when the company needed complete focus, claiming their relationship had damaged her judgment. Gavin fired back, insisting she had used him to create a perfect public image before abandoning him the moment problems appeared. Every conversation between them became another argument filled with blame and resentment. Eventually, their engagement ended almost as publicly as it had begun. The glamorous future they had celebrated in front of executives and investors slowly unraveled, replaced by legal meetings, financial uncertainty, and broken promises. I watched everything from a distance without interfering. I never celebrated their downfall or tried to make their situation worse. My responsibility was simply to protect the investment trust and make decisions based on facts. The consequences they faced were not created by revenge, but by the choices they had made themselves. Several months passed before I heard from Gavin again. His message was brief and respectful. He asked if I would be willing to meet him for coffee, saying there were things he needed to say in person. After thinking about it for a day, I agreed. Not because I wanted closure from him, but because I had already found peace within myself. When I arrived at the cafe, I almost didn't recognize him. The expensive designer suits were gone, replaced by a simple jacket and a tired expression. The confidence that once filled every room had disappeared. He looked like someone who had spent months living with the consequences of his own decisions. After a long silence, Gavin admitted he had been chasing status instead of appreciating the person who had stood beside him from the beginning. He confessed that wealth and influence had blinded him, making him believe success was more important than loyalty. Looking down at the table, He apologized for humiliating me on Valentine's Day and said he finally understood how deeply he had hurt me. He also admitted that despite spending 7 years together, he had never truly known the woman he married. I listened without interrupting. The anger I once carried was gone, replaced by acceptance. Holding on to resentment would only keep me connected to a painful chapter one had already left behind. When he finished speaking, I thanked him for taking responsibility and accepted his apology. But I also told him that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. Trust, once broken so completely, could not simply be rebuilt with regret. Some choices permanently change the direction of a person's life, no matter how sincere the apology that comes afterward may be. Once the investigation officially concluded, I turned my full attention to the future instead of the past. The experience had reminded me how easily success could be corrupted when honesty was replaced by greed. I wanted my grandfather's investment company to represent the values he had spent a lifetime building, so I worked with the leadership team to strengthen our ethical standards. Every proposal received careful review, and transparency became a requirement rather than a promise. Rather than investing only in large corporations with impressive public images, I began looking for honest entrepreneurs with practical ideas and strong character. Many of them lacked powerful connections but possessed integrity and determination. Helping those businesses grow brought me far more satisfaction than chasing headlines or recognition ever could. Inside the company, I encouraged an open culture where every employee felt respected regardless of their position. I remembered what it was like to be underestimated and ignored, so I made sure people were judged by their work instead of their titles. Over time, employees trusted my leadership because they knew decisions were based on fairness rather than favoritism. Nolan remained one of my closest professional advisors throughout the process. Whenever difficult choices appeared, his experience and steady guidance reminded me to focus on long-term principles instead of short-term emotions. He had helped protect my grandfather's legacy, and now he helped me shape its future. Little by little, my life became peaceful again. The betrayal that once defined my days no longer controlled my thoughts. I wasn't motivated by revenge anymore. I had discovered something far more valuable, a clear purpose, meaningful work, and the confidence to move forward without carrying the weight of the past. Almost a year after the night that changed my life, Valentine's Day arrived once again. This time, instead of dreading the date, I accepted an invitation to a charity business gala that raised scholarship funds for young entrepreneurs hoping to start their own companies. Walking into another elegant ballroom could have reminded me of the worst night of my life, but something had changed. I no longer carried fear or bitterness with me. The memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to define who I was. Throughout the evening, I met business owners, investors, and scholarship recipients whose ideas inspired me. Several executives approached to thank me for insisting on responsible leadership during the previous year's financial review. They explained that my decisions had protected investors, employees, and honest businesses from much greater losses. Hearing those words meant more to me than any public recognition ever could because they reflected the values my grandfather had taught me. As the event drew to a close, I happened to glance across the ballroom. Near the exit, I saw Gavin preparing to leave. He looked in my direction for only a brief moment before quietly walking away. There was no anger in his expression and no attempt to speak. I didn't call after him. There was nothing left that either of us needed to say. A year earlier, he believed money and status determined a person's worth. I had once believed love alone could hold a marriage together. Life had taught us both different lessons. In the end, wealth could open doors, but only character earned lasting respect, and that truth mattered far more than appearances ever would. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized losing Gavin wasn't the tragedy I once believed it was. At first, I thought my life had fallen apart the moment he chose someone else. But with time, I understood that his decision had actually saved me from spending the rest of my life with a man who valued wealth, status, and appearances more than loyalty, honesty, and love. The pain I felt on Valentine's Day eventually became the beginning of a better future. I also learned that I never needed dramatic revenge to make things right. I didn't have to humiliate anyone or destroy their lives out of anger. The truth had a way of revealing itself without my help. Honest investigations exposed what had been hidden, and every consequence that followed came from choices Gavin and Celine had made long before I stepped into that conference room. Gavin gave up unconditional love in exchange for a life he believed would bring endless luxury and influence. In the end, he lost both. Celine spent years building an image of unstoppable success, only to watch it unravel when her business faced honest scrutiny. Neither of them was defeated by me. They were defeated by their own decisions. As for me, I walked away with something far more valuable than revenge. I rebuilt my life with purpose, protected my grandfather's legacy, and surrounded myself with people who respected character over wealth. I finally understood that happiness isn't found in proving your worth to those who never appreciated you. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who betrayed you. It's creating a life so full of peace, purpose, and self-respect that their betrayal no longer has the power to define your future. That became my greatest victory.